Artist Meg Lionel Murphy was one of our earliest collaborators at Toni's house. Her rise from a young, talented graphic illustrator and magazine publisher to a widely exhibited painter has been incredible to witness. But her artistic inspiration is rooted in the trauma and violence she experienced. We wanted to learn from Meg how expression can be one of the first steps of recovery, and how she brings color to and shines a light on an issue that our society doesn't speak openly about often enough: intimate partner violence. Meg, hi. We're so thrilled to have you. Thank you so much for joining us and being willing to share your story. You are one of Toni's house's earliest collaborators, so it's really deeply moving and important to us that you were willing to join and able to join. And I just also wanted to say that we're all so proud of everything that you've accomplished over the last few years. Since we launched, your career is also flourishing. And so we're so happy to see that, to see your art blossom as we knew that it would. So thanks for this conversation. For those who don't know you and your work, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
I am Meg Lionel Murphy, and I am primarily an artist, and I live in rural Wisconsin, of all places, but I show primarily in New York and LA. And I've been working out of my studio pretty remotely, but I make these giant paintings of femme bodies that are growing out of pain. So they can't stop themselves, and they are just growing so much bigger than their homes. And then they have to start wandering through this kind of apocalyptic landscape to find each other until they find these new spaces that they can kind of make a new home for their giant, very pained bodies.
Why are you an artist?
Why am I an artist? I have always been an artist, and I need it for so many reasons, mostly for my mental health, honestly. Without it, I can't function. I can't focus. I can't live. So I do it mostly to live, selfishly. And I do struggle to work in any other field. I've worked in publishing, and I've worked in nonprofits, and I've had a big career outside of art, but I don't thrive there. And art's really the place for me to be a human.
You are very forthcoming about the fact that one of the central themes of your paintings, but also sort of driving force of your work, is very much informed by your own experiences of suffering from PTSD, from what you describe as experiences of severe domestic violence. So to the extent that you're willing to share, what was your experience of domestic violence?
Yeah, I think for so many people that experience domestic violence as an adult, there are springs of it that happen in childhood. So I think I was used to violence to a degree as a child that made me primed to not see it as an adult, to see it as very intertwined with love. And so I have experienced various forms of violence in my life. And when I found a partner, or what I thought was a partner, I was very young, and which is almost its own sort of violence. I grew up in a very religious family, and everyone in my family had gotten married quite young, and I just thought that was what you were supposed to do. So I was, I was 22, and I got married to somebody that I thought was the most kindest, most incredible person in the world. Is now I realize that's what happens to so many people, where you think you're finding your person that will heal the pain that you've been through, but oftentimes they know exactly how to manipulate that pain. And so it was a very brutal marriage with a lot of addiction, and the level of violence was profound to the degree that I really do think I should be dead. Like, I should be dead. And I think there are so many times that I just imagine there are certain moments where I did feel like I died, where I just kind of was there was so much violence that I found myself, on the floor with my body like hovering above me, like that you hear in like near death experiences. And I was just like, I will die now. Like, this is the end for me. And I think a lot of times I was looking for people to say something that it was wrong, but nobody could quite see it. I was so good at hiding it. There were always, we would get the police called on us, which is its own trauma and terrible. And I would lie because I was so afraid of what would happen. And so for some reason, it feels like, you cannot live without this person, and yet they're going to kill you. So you're in this, you just feel like there's no way to live. And I just stayed in that kind of tornado of pain for a very long time, and until it got so bad that it was more dramatic physical evidence on me. And that's when people started to get more concerned. And I didn't necessarily have the support of my family through the divorce at all. And it took years to rebuild any kind of relationship with them. And now we're extremely close. But it really took a friend of mine who did something that people never do. And it is so important. It's the kind of thing that Toni the House does, where you just need someone to like go to and to believe in, and that'll believe in you and just help you. And so they actually intersected me when I was working with Toni's house, and I didn't have any access to money or anything. Very typical in domestic abuse, that he would take all of our money, anything I got, and so I had nothing. I had no way to leave, and but he had taken some money I had gotten from Toni's house in the past, but just for doing design work, of course. And this friend of mine was just so wonderful, because she did a thing that it takes, where she came to me and she said, I cannot watch this anymore. And people had never actually said that to me. People didn't want to talk about it. And she said, I will leave this friendship. I will leave you, basically, if you don't leave, because I can't do it. I can't watch this happen to you anymore. And she said, if you leave, I will help you. Like, I'll do anything I can to help you. And one of the first things she did was she took me to a bank and she sat down with me like a mom. And I had the check, and she said, we are going to put this check into this bank account. And I think it was like $2,000 or something. And it was all I had in the world. And I was able to start my life with that. I was able to get a tiny, tiny, tiny apartment that was awful. But she was so good at preparing me for, like, I remember she said, your life is going to be very bad for a little while, but it's going to be much better than what you're experiencing now. And she was totally right. So that $2,000, I wasn't allowed to have a job. I wasn't allowed to work. So I was able to somehow get a job and an apartment in that time. And of course it didn't stop, because I was still married. I had to get divorced. I still very much in my life. But I was able to at least have a place to go. It was so good. And anyways, I didn't paint at all during the time of the marriage, but I did start painting as soon as I left in that little tiny apartment. So it changed my life in all the ways.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to ask you a couple of specific questions around things that you said, because I think it's extremely important for us to talk more about it, because people don't about like kind of specifically how these kinds of relationships develop and how people find themselves sort of blindsided by something that they feel in the moment that they didn't see coming, because maybe they didn't recognize certain signs, or they weren't paying attention to certain things that were building in the relationship. And then also, as it pertains to people who are outside of the relationship looking in, sort of not recognizing, or in some cases maybe having some small signs that something isn't right, but not wanting to breach that level of whatever their comfort zone is to kind of speak on it the way that your friend did. So my first question is, can you take me back to a little bit more about the beginning of this relationship and what it was like, and then at what point and what was happening when you noticed that like something was very different, and that this was now potentially harmful or not a healthy relationship and not the relationship that you thought that you had? What was that shift that happened?
So my partner, my first husband, was wonderful. I mean, truly, from the outside, the most gregarious, sweet, loving person. So he was Polish, and his nickname was Mishu, which means little bear, teddy bear. And so that just kind of is so funny and ironic, because what he was such a violent person when the doors were closed and we were alone. And I had suffered a big loss in my life. I lost one of my best friends, had passed away without any warning in the shower, just had died one day. And it really affected me, where I felt like, I was so young at like 20. I was even younger then. I was like 20 or 21. And I just thought, oh my goodness, life is ending. I just need to get married. I'm so old. I need to do this. And here's this person who's so wonderful. And the economy was really bad at that time. It was, 2008, 2009, and there were no jobs to be had. And I think I was raised to think that I needed support. Like, I was always raised to be married, to be a wife, which is really sad to me now. And I wanted sort of family. I thought I was really in a very conservative, which now feels archaic, kind of existence. And so many people find happiness in that way of life, but it can also be extremely abusive in its own way, to be raised into thinking that at such a young age you can start merging your life before you even know who you are as a person. So
how long had you been married when things started to kind of change from that fairy tale relationship that you kind of described it was in the beginning?
It actually started almost immediately after we got engaged. We moved in together, and then we got engaged right away, like boom, boom. And so just around that time, it did happen. And it was immediate. It was just one day it was perfect and one day it wasn't. I know people, at least that's how I perceived it at the time. I suppose because I was living with him, I could just, there was nowhere for him to hide either. So yes, I don't know. It was immediate. Mm-hmm.
But if this was happening in your engagement, what was happening like internally that made you feel, no, this is still, okay, this is different than, what he kind of presented when we were dating, but I'm still going to move forward with the relationship. This is still the choice that I want to make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's funny because I think I was very comfortable with love that was entwined with a certain level of mental illness and violence. And so it almost felt normal. It felt like, oh, this is just what life is. This is just what love is. And I also did not have enough belief in myself that I could leave. I really felt like this was completely the only option for me, and this was just going to be my life. And I thought I could also, we could work through it. I remember there were moments I slept outside of our house because I was so afraid of going back inside, and it would be cold. I lived in Minnesota. It was terrible. But that was before we got married. There were so many bad things that happened before we got married where it was enough that I should not have gotten married. But it never occurred to me that I should not, even though I did not want to. I knew I did not want to. I remember the day of the wedding being devastated. I was like an hour late, and I was walking down the aisle, just pure dread, like, oh my God, this is going to kill me. This is a terrible idea. But I just had I had thought that, and he had made me feel that I was so worthless and so awful of a person, that this was what I deserved. And this is just my reality. And I was unhappy, but I never questioned that it shouldn't be my reality. I could see the pain in him as he was doing it to me, which is sad too. I've never been able to detach my empathy for him in that situation, but just the fury and the rage. Oh my goodness. Okay. It was just awful. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Was Mishu much older than you?
No, actually, just a year older, and was an engineering student. So all of our friends were engineers, and, he was very smart and very bright.
So were you a very social person in your youth? Did you have a lot of friends when you met him? Did your social life change? Was there space for you to have your own friends outside of your relationship with him?
Yeah. It's funny because I do feel like a very different person. I grew up in such a rural setting where there was no art. I had never gone to a museum until I was a senior in high school. So I had no concept of what artists were like. And when I got to college, they terrified me so much. I was terrified of these artists. Who are these people? They're so free. I just couldn't even, I didn't have many friends that were artists, even though I was studying art. And I really felt safe with the engineers. They were so focused. And so for some reason, it was just me and all these engineers. All of my roommates were some of the only women in their engineering classes. And they're brilliant now and have gone on to do amazing things. And yeah, so I have no idea how it happened, but yeah, he was an engineer, and we did a lot of the people in college were drinking a lot. So at the time, and doing, drugs. So I just felt you can't quite see who is using that in a way that might be really dangerous versus who is being young and experimenting and exploring. Yeah. And so I wasn't quite able to see it in that moment. But when we graduated college and found ourselves together, he couldn't stop. He couldn't stop that lifestyle, and everyone else did. And I think he was very alone, and then internalized all of it and started drinking and using alone.
Did you notice a relationship between the addiction and the arguments, or the addiction and the abuse or the punishment? Was it something that he was going through separately? Is it something that you were also engaging in?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's hard to understand the violence next to addiction because it absolutely fueled his rage and violence. But I always wonder, I think would it have existed outside of it? I don't know, because with his addiction, he never was not drinking. So I didn't, but he did it in secret. So when we made the transition from our, college, just, I think everyone, I had to work 3 jobs to go through college. I didn't have time to go out. So I actually didn't go out with my friends a lot. I was home working. But I would see them a lot. They'd be around our house. And so I didn't even really get to see him in action with my friends as much. I would absolutely go out and I would see it. He just seemed like the life of the party, so fun. And he was always fun to be around. So I was like, this is great. I have just the most fun, gregarious, sweet, lovely partner. And when that ended, when everyone got real jobs, and I think with engineering, it is very difficult because you are really in a real job quickly. And all of his friends were too busy to play with him anymore. And I've never been partier in any way. I can't drink very much. I get tired. So I was just not as much fun for him. So he, I think, started using by himself, and I was not aware he was doing that. So I actually thought he might have a brain tumor or something, because I could see the changes happening. And I actually kept saying, you need to go to the doctor. Something's not right. You're not acting right. Something isn't happening. And I just didn't realize he was extremely drunk, which is funny now. I don't know how I didn't see it, because I learned to smell it and to see it, and you could just see it. But at the time I was so, if you don't see it going in, you can't understand what's happening. So I actually made an appointment. We went to the ER or something. I don't know if I made an appointment or we went to the ER. I can't remember, but I remember getting in the car and going to the doctor and sitting with him in front of the doctor, and the doctor saying, have you been drinking? And he was like, oh, a little bit. And I was like, what? I didn't see him drinking. And he realized he was drinking. And all of a sudden we were in detox. Like, we were in detox because he was so drunk. And I didn't even know he had drink anything. I thought he was just acting strange. I mean, he had tremors. He was just so, I can't even describe it. You don't know someone completely drunk. It was just confusing. So we got to the ER, or to detox, actually. And this is just the first moment where it's all coming to me like, oh my goodness, okay, something is happening. And we sat there for hours and hours and hours. And apparently detox was very full and busy. So a nurse came out with him. We were trying to get him to stay there, and she came out and she said, this really isn't a place for him. He's an engineer. And I think it's going to be scarring for him to stay the night in detox. I think you should just take him home and let him detox there. And here's what you need to watch out for. Just take him home. So I was like, okay, that sounds scary. So we took him, and they gave him Ativan too. I don't know why. I don't understand any of it. So we got home, and he was on Ativan and extremely drunk. And it was the first time I realized what was happening. And it was honestly at that moment, everything goes black. And the rest of my life was just horrific, because from that point on, I knew that there was addiction. So I thought it could be fixed. I was like, okay, there's addiction here. So if we can work on that, maybe the violence will stop and everything will be okay. And so that started years of treatment and hope for him. And it didn't work out very well for me, or him actually. But I think he has since gotten sober, which is wonderful. And well, as much as I know, we're not in contact, but I've heard that he has, and it took a very long time for that to happen.
So I want to talk a little bit about the people who are around you in life, because you said a couple of things. One, that people didn't really necessarily speak directly to you about anything, whether that was because maybe they were uncomfortable or they didn't want to make you uncomfortable, or they just didn't see it. So I'm curious to know, what was that? How did you present yourself, and how did you guys try to present the relationship in public or to people intimately close to you that was different than what was going on at home?
It's hard for me because in that moment, I was trying to protect myself as much as possible. I was trying to protect him. I didn't want anyone to know at all. And so I was walking this tightrope of trying to make things as normal as possible. But also, I remember looking around my life and being like, can't everyone see this is a problem? Where is everyone? Who's going to save me? But what I've learned with a lot of time is that I was trying to hide it. And I think, so it looked to me like a lot of people couldn't see what I wanted them to see because I didn't want them to see it. It's very confusing. I don't even understand how that can be. Both things can be true at once. But as it got worse and worse and worse, we had been in and out of so many rehabs because, again, I had made it my job to fix it. I was like, this can be fixed. It's going to be okay. And then when I would get beaten, it felt like it was just a matter of time before everything was going to be okay. I can take this because everything's going to be okay. And this is just temporary in my mind, I had thought. So then if it was temporary, I could take it and no one needed to know. But as it got worse and worse and worse, and there were more visible bruises, which are painful to talk about anyway, because that is such a cliche. It shouldn't take that because the terror happened so much before that. And there are signs, and I can see them, and we should talk about them more as a society before it gets there. But once there were more visible signs, that's when I did have this particular friend who was able to kind of put an end to it. But I think something that's really important to mention is that when you're in a domestic violence situation, I say this with a lot of love and a bit of humor, you're kind of an awful person. In a way that I was terrible. I was so awful to be around. I was so devastated and hurt and I felt like an animal. I just felt like a cage. I felt inhuman because I was just getting my nervous system completely jolted every second of every day that I had pushed so many people around me away. And meanwhile, this person that was being violent is so charismatic, so wonderful to be around. Everyone loves him, So, and it's very common where when I did start to say, when it was more visible, and then this friend had mentioned, this isn't okay, you need to leave. When I started to think, okay, I need to leave, there were so many people around me that were angry with me and upset with me and took his side as if there were sides. I mean, one of my closest friends who I did have to stay with her every once in a while, and she was an engineering student, and there were nights where I would have one of my friends would drive to my house, pick me up, because I would just call her as he was beating me, and I would be screaming and crying. So her and her husband would come pick me up. They'd drive me to this other friend's house because she had an extra room, and I would stay there. And this kept happening. And she was friends with both of us. And then one day she took me out to dinner and she said, I don't think you should get a divorce. I think you need to stay, and he needs to get better. He has an addiction issue. And if he can get through this, like, he'll stop. And she said, this is heartbreaking. She said, my dad beat my mom and they stayed together. That's what marriage is. It's a vow. Like, it's so much more complex than the abuse. And in that moment, my heart broke for her. But I was to the point where I knew if I didn't leave, I would die. I just knew it. There was no way around it. And unfortunately, I never talked to her again. I couldn't keep anyone in my life that wasn't supportive of me leaving in that moment, because it was too hard to leave as it was. So anyone that wasn't fully behind me leaving, I just had to leave. I had to leave out of my life. So my world got very, 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 very small. And there were probably a lot of questions people had because I had kept it so secret for so long. But I didn't have time or the ability to even talk through it or parse through any of it. I just needed to get out. And so really my world became one person for a little while, this one friend that was like, I will help you. And it was just me and her, basically, and alone in my apartment with my cat. And that was it for like a very long time.
Tell me a little bit more about that particular friend. Like, and was it her or their approach to you, like just being direct and like being honest with you to kind of give you that mirror or another voice to validate the parts of yourself that knew that you needed support and assistance, but also needed to leave? Or did she know and see things that other people didn't? And just what was your friendship like? Why was their words to you more impactful in a way to kind of get you to take that leap?
I guess the first person that ever told me to leave was actually in a rehab facility, Hazelton in Minnesota. One of the counselors there for my ex-husband came to me, held my hands, looked me directly in the eyes and said, you need to leave. And she said, I've never seen someone able to lie. Like, this person is lying to you and he's hurting you and you need to leave. And it took me a very long time after that to leave, but nobody else had said that to me. Nobody. And at the time, my parents knew, his parents knew, and neither of them, they didn't want us to break up. So she was the second person that ever said this to me. And she said, I needed to leave. And I had already started having these like out of body experiences where I was like, they scared me so much. And when he finally was in one rehab where he was gone for a few days, I had a little bit of time where she came over and sat with me and looked me in the eyes and was just, it wasn't just that she told me to leave, she offered to help me. And I was finally willing and desperate enough to take her help. And it was just a place to stay and a little bit of money that made it possible. And just someone who believed me. And it's so simple. But that's what it took.
It's really interesting that you told that anecdote about how the first time that you guys went to a detox one of the medical professionals suggested that detox wasn't the right place for him because he was an engineer, which has nothing to do with addiction. So, but too often people who present as being productive, as being highly functional, high earners, well educated, or whatever the case might be, sort of get this extra benefit of the doubt, or people conflate that with the idea that, that also means that they're put together on the inside, or that they can somehow deal with these challenges better than other people. And because, unfortunately, we attach so many negative generalizations and stereotypes to things like addiction, that it's like the people who are addicts, like this image that comes to mind isn't fitting the description of this person. So you can't reconcile the two. And that's really unfortunate, because in some ways that kept him from getting like maybe an earlier intervention or a different kind of support. But I think it also is true for you, because throughout this time, even though it sounds like he was trying to control the finances in the household and kind of control your choices, you still had a lot of experiences of, growing in your profession, of being productive. When I met you, you were, in the design business, and you were doing your thing with the literary magazine. So how did you cope day to day? And how did you navigate, like, sort of still finding success in those spaces, even though you were sort of going through this daily trauma at home?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I was absolutely raised in a house. I grew up in a small motel. My parents had a little motel, and so I grew up in the business. So we were always working, always. There was never not work. And so, we'd be checking people in or cleaning motel rooms, and we lived there. So I always just knew how to work, and I worked a lot to get through college, and work was so much a part of who I was that I always wanted to work, and I wanted to work even more than he would let me. And the beautiful thing about the internet and design was he couldn't stop that. Like, I remember even just wanting to get any kind of job that I could just have a tiny bit of my own money. And he did not want that. He didn't want me to have a car, did not want me to have money. He wanted me to be completely dependent on him, and he would give me permission to do absolutely everything.
But how would he frame that to you? I'm sure he didn't explain it to you that way. Like, what was the manipulation, or how did he, what's the word for it? Like, how did he validate that argument that you shouldn't work or you shouldn't do this or that?
Yeah. Well, one part was, it was the recession. So there weren't really any jobs for me to get, but there would have been, like, I remember I wanted to work as a waitress at a little place down the street. And he was like, absolutely not. You cannot do that. That is not good enough for you. Like, you can't. And meanwhile, part of the motel was a little bar and grill. So I grew up doing that. It was like very easy for me. It would have been so wonderful. And he was just like, you cannot do that. That is not good enough. You can't do that. And then I would apply or want jobs, and he'd be like, oh, that's not good enough. That's not good. You can't do that. Why would you do that? I'll just pay for this. Like, you just stay home. And he did seem to like the idea of me having this. I had a literary and art magazine, and he seemed to like it. So he would just be like, work on that. But of course, there's no money in that. There's nothing. And I loved it, but there was just zero money in it. So I just couldn't get money, but I would pour myself into it. And then there would be little tiny opportunities through it. And that was my saving grace. That was how I met you. There were these little people would see what I was doing there, and they would hire me to do things. And it was so beautiful. And I loved every second of it. And then there were moments where maybe I got a check and intercepted it, because again, back then you got checks mailed to you. I mean, it doesn't even happen that way now, but he would get the check in the mail and then put it in his account. I only had an account through him. So when he was in rehab, that's when I got my check. And that was how I intercepted it. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's made out to just me. I can do this. But the thing though, that I find really interesting, is that this is something that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, but I think it's got to be real for a lot of people, where I do have extreme ADHD. So I have a very hard time focusing on anything. And after I would get severely beaten, I would have these like huge bursts of mental clarity. Like I could focus on anything so easily because it was so much adrenaline. And adrenaline alone in domestic violence situations, I would love to do more research on, because it's just there. It's like its own kind of drug in a weird way. And so I would just work so hard and have so much focus and be able to do so much and do really good work in these moments right after the abuse, which is terrible. I mean, I would be like, I'd go from like being completely beaten to designing or making, like just designing work, and doing my literary and art magazine work. And I would get so much done and build so much and have confidence in a weird way to do it, just because of the adrenaline. It did something to my adrenaline. That's all it is. And it took, actually, when I left him, a long time for me to realize how to make work without that. So that's a really strange phenomenon that I'd love to learn more about, but I don't understand it even. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I suppose you've said it. You've talked about the friend who just offered you the really simple support of a place to go and helping you to figure out the financial piece that would make that possible. And as you know very well, Toni's House has helped a lot of survivors of different kinds of abuse, but certainly domestic violence as well, to just have that safe place to go. I just want you to speak a little bit more about why that's so important, not only just to have somewhere to like move to out of the home, but also when it was just you and you had that space physically, what started to happen, just having a little distance to be with yourself, to figure out what comes next. Because I think that's also part of why having a place to go is so important, not only to remove the person physically, but to give them that distance so that they can kind of get back in tune with themselves, which is oftentimes something that the abuser tries to take away. Or, they're so busy gaslighting you that sometimes you can't really decipher what's real or what like is in your head and all of that kind of stuff.
It just is remarkable to me, because I was learning so much about Toni's House while I was in this space. And I remember just like thinking it was so beautiful. Like, I just remember, I can even like picture, and still in my mind, so much of what I was learning about Toni's House in that moment. And I'm sure it had an effect on me to even understand how sacred a home should be. And I think when I do think of my little tiny apartment, it was, $600 a month. I didn't have a job. I had $2,000 so I could pay the first, my deposit. And so it was already like more than half gone the first month. And I had just utter fear that I would not be able to survive on my own, because that is part of the manipulation, is that you're told over and over that you are bad, you are terrible, you are the worst thing on this planet. How dare you even exist and be like, this person is so benevolent to even tolerate you or live with you or allow you to even live. My self-esteem was just so low. And even being around people was so difficult. Going to the grocery store, walking down the street, seeing my neighbors in the hallway. I was such a shell of myself that the only place I felt safe was this tiny little studio apartment. It was so small. And I just think of it now, and it was just the most beautiful, like that moment of landing where you can just breathe and be safe. And just for my body to learn took a really long time, years. Probably, I've only started feeling better in my body within the last 2 years. And so, over 10 years, it's taken me to just feel at peace in a room by myself. Like, maybe I'll be safe in this room. But the first glimpses of that were so overpowering and so overwhelming, and did feel almost psychedelic in the way of the transformation. And like, it just was so radical to be in danger in every single second, and then to have a place to breathe. It's just such a gift. It's such a gift.
Yeah, I think that's why you paint these giants who are not afraid to take up all of the space in the world. How did you identify with, or I don't know if it's an official diagnosis, but how did you come to frame the aftermath of your experience as PTSD, and what is your healing process? Well, actually, in one of the other conversations, we made a distinction between healing and recovery. So I'm going to say, what has your recovery process been like?
Yeah, I was so lucky. It's scary how much luck came into my ability to get out of that relationship. The fact that I met you and had this small amount of money to leave was something. But another tiny moment of luck was I was walking down the street when I got to my new apartment. And so I started using a different grocery store, as you do, new apartment, new place, new grocery store. And I was walking to the grocery store, and I just looked to my right, and there was a piece of paper, a flyer advertising a domestic violence support group. And so just a little piece of paper just said domestic violence support group. And I thought, I wonder if I qualify for that, which is so silly because I definitely did, but I couldn't even see it at that moment. I was like, I wonder if I qualify to go to this support group. And so I called the number just by pure chance, and they did an intake with me. And I actually got free therapy with graduate students for several years. And then they put me into a support group with other women. And it was just the most profound experience of my life to be with those people healing. And so, yeah, I just, through those, I got the diagnosis of very severe PTSD. And the hard part about that was it was through a free program with, graduate students. So it took me a very long time after that to find a good therapist. It's hard to find a therapist. And I think it took me, about 5 years to find someone certified in severe trauma. And then that helped from that point to kind of learn some of the different techniques. And for me, CPT really helped. Not CBT, but CPT was very helpful and not perfect. I still feel like I struggle a lot, but it did help me at least to balance out a lot of the negative thoughts in my head, because the worst part of the trauma for me was I carried all of the negativity and all of the beliefs about I still felt like I deserved everything that happened to me for so long. Like, and I believed everything he said about me. And his voice stayed with me in my head every single day. And it was just a lot of the CPT helped me kind of reverse some of those negative thoughts, or not even reverse, just like to sit with them differently. So I've gotten a little bit of peace only in the last few years through that.
When you got the apartment, did Misha know where you were going, or did you have to go to a place where he wouldn't know where you were at?
So unfortunately, he did figure out where I lived, and he would just come there all the time, and he didn't have a key. So when we were still married for years after that, it took a very long time to get divorced. He didn't want to get divorced. So he was very much in my life for a long time after that, and definitely found ways to terrorize me. But it was at least safe. Like I could have as much safety as possible, at least inside the apartment. But, he would always be outside the apartment, always playing. He would play his music. He would get in his car and like play his music extremely loud, so I knew he was there. Or he would just sit on my stoop and just like wait for me to leave or come out. And it was a whole other ordeal. But it was the only place I could afford. And I stayed there for years. And I think eventually he just got a little tired of me, and he just kind of less and less. And finally, after many years, we finally got a divorce. I think because he met someone else. So he finally needed to be rid of me.
And once you left, did you ever consider going back, or were you like, I just took a deep breath and that door is like closed. I'm just looking toward the future now?
Yes, this is terrible, but to be very honest, I absolutely wanted to go back many times. I thought I made the worst decision of my life. Because I was in such a terrible place, I thought, what did I do? Like, I'm alone here. I'm an idiot. I should definitely go back. This is the worst. And I hate that. I hate that I did that, but I absolutely wanted to go back for a very long time, and would consider it and think about it. And sometimes even see him and talk to him about it. Like, are you going to get better? Is this going to be okay? But as I got stronger and stronger through therapy, it occurred to me that was just never going to happen. And it wasn't good to even think that way.
That's something that happens often. That's why I asked. Why do you think that art is such a powerful medium to kind of foster a therapeutic process or experience? And what role has that played for you in your recovery?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've always used art to calm my nervous system, to calm my body. And even as a kid, it was just a place for me to feel at peace. I didn't paint at all while I was with my ex-husband, and I missed it very much. I mean, as soon as we moved in together, I stopped painting. This is devastating. But I remember getting out my paints right after we got married, and I was sitting in the living room just painting and so happy. And he sat down next to me, and he slowly turned his head, and he looked at me and he said, "I am so much better than you." And he just hated when I painted. He couldn't let me paint. He hated when I painted. So I just stopped because it would irritate him so much. And when I did leave and I was in this tiny apartment, I just had this flood of like imagery about homes and houses. And the whole concept of my work is they do grow to be safe. Like, I just needed to make an image for myself that showed they're like too big to hurt physically. They're so much bigger than the men, honestly. And the world of them. So they can't be hurt, but they no longer fit inside their homes. So there's like a lot of loss in them for me. Like they're holding like little tiny furniture. Like they can't, like, it's almost like, are they children? Are they dolls? Are they, what is, sometimes I wonder, are they just like adults holding tiny doll furniture? Like wondering what went wrong. Or are they these giant figures hovering over, these buildings that they could squish in a second? It's like, I like that juxtaposition because some days I feel like a little girl and some days I feel proud and like a giant that I got through it all. But I do think that art, without a doubt, just makes me feel at peace. And it's like entering another portal. I really do feel like there's some kind of wonderland inside me that I can tap into. And in that creative space, there's so much beauty. It's my religion. It's like euphoric. It's its own kind of psychedelic drug in a weird way. It's just so profound, all of the world that I can tap into inside me. And so honestly, it's hard to even come out of that world. I just want to be in that world all the time. It's a much safer, more beautiful world than even our own world for me. So sometimes the hard part is even just like, okay, be a person.
Yeah. I can relate to that for sure. So tell me a little bit more about your artistic practice today. You're focusing on painting full time, and you have a particular setting for your studio. So how did this go from you just started painting again because it was this activity that you love to things kind of snowballing and growing into like a full-time practice?
Because I had made this literary and art magazine, we actually got the attention. So the friend that basically saved my life was also running this literary and art magazine with me.
I knew it. Somehow I knew that was the friend, but I forgot to ask earlier.
Totally. Yes, we are so intertwined.
Okay.
And so we just kept making this thing together that was so beautiful. And then we got the attention of a foundation in the Twin Cities that then gave us a grant to operationalize, but then create a nonprofit that focused on doing what we did for fiction, for nonfiction. So we did a lot of like immersive, artful storytelling around issues of social justice and trying to make the Twin Cities a better place. And that's a very simplified version of it, but that was such a profound and beautiful experience. And I found myself in a leadership role. So we were co-executive. Pollen Midwest. And it still exists. And we were co-executive directors there. So we were leading the organization. We brought on a team. We were fully operationalizing, hiring writers and artists. And yeah, so we fully operationalized. And as I was doing that, I was painting. And so I would wake up at 4 a.m. and I would paint until I had to go to work at around 9. And then I would come home and I would paint, and I was sleeping very little and just painting a lot. There was this one day where we had organized an event for women, actually. And in this event, people were invited to like stand up and just say to the crowd, like things they would like to do with their life, like things that they want, if they felt so comfortable to say like something out loud to this amazing group of people, a hope for yourself that you wanted to share, almost so that you might make it more real. And so I took the opportunity at this event that we organized to say, I paint every day. And I don't show anyone, like I just do it for myself. And there was a curator there who had kind of seen I was just like starting to post about it on social media here and there just a little bit. And she's like, I really like what you've been posting. Let's talk. And so that never happens again, just like chance. It really is just like these few people just believing in you going forward. And her name is Trisha Herring, and she runs an organization called Public Functionary in the Twin Cities, and she's helped an incredible amount of artists find their footing. And she just gave me everything with that opportunity, and everything just snowballed from there. I had a show with her, and then another curator saw it, and I got another show and another show and another show. And then through, the internet, I was able to meet, my curator in New York, and started showing in larger arenas and getting collectors and getting placed in museums. And it became very real very quickly. And it isn't easy. There's not a lot of financial stability in the art world. Shocking. And with my history, I do know how important it is to be independent and to be able to support myself. And so I do have a lot of fear around it. So that's one of the reasons I decided to move to this very small place where things are very affordable comparatively to the rest of the world. And I was able to get a studio. And then eventually I met someone, and we are now partners, and they've bought a building here, and we have been fixing it up for the last year. And it's one of the oldest buildings in town, and it should have been condemned. It was very bad. So it's taken a year to build the building that I'm making my work out of. So I haven't been able to paint as much as I'd want to in the last 6 months in particular, because we've been building this thing. But it's very satisfying to be building. A place that is safe, that I can continue to make my work in a way that's sustainable.
Yeah, it's working because people are being really receptive to your work, and that's evident on social media. It's evident in publications that have covered your work, and the paintings themselves have also sparked conversations around mental health. You've commented that women have sometimes direct messaged you on social media to talk about how your work impacts them. How does it feel to move through your artistic practice where at first it was just something that you needed to do to, channel whatever energy and positivity you get out of that experience, to now kind of going onto a global stage with your work where it's impacting other people and you're being recognized for the work as well?
Yes, I absolutely just want to keep making my work. And it's hard to just keep making the work because the art world is an unstable place financially. But the most important thing for me is if I can find a venue where there are a lot of people are able to come see my work at once, and I can just like stand in front of people that have experienced extreme violence. That is such an unexpected layer. And I've met so many people that will come in and just cry. And then we'll cry together. And I do talk to a lot of people that have experienced extreme violence through social media. And that is such a different part of it, and such a beautiful part of it. And so while I do have some misgivings around the art world, it's a very strange place that is not meant for a person from the middle of nowhere with extreme mental illness probably to thrive. It is a beautiful way to connect to other humans, and it's flawed and beautiful. And I feel so lucky to be able to just find others, and we can inspire each other to keep moving forward. But it is, it's not the healthiest place in the world. I will say the art world is not a healthy environment. Like, especially the farther in you get, it's built for extreme wealth. And that makes me uncomfortable. So I'm still trying to like understand my place in the art world, but I have been very lucky to find an audience and a collectorship.
You actually have degrees in art and art history and in English literature, right? And you co-founded this literary magazine with your friend who also played a whole other important role in your life, like we spoke about. And I'm just curious, like we've spoken about how art has played a role in your recovery, but what about reading literature or even writing? Has that played a role in your recovery?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, my entire life has just been a fight between art and literature, like where I want to put my focus. And I love both so much. Reading and looking at art, that is my religion. That is my God. Like, that's all I need to be fulfilled and to have a spiritual practice, is just to like read a book and look at a piece of art or learn about artists and writers' lives, because it is such a difficult thing to just make a life making work, and even just learning about people that make art. I guess that's art history. It fills me with such a profound experience. I can't even explain it, but I did come across the work of Virginia Woolf, and it was probably the first serious writer that I had ever encountered. And so she kind of imprinted on me. Like, I just made her my little, her work became like a Bible for me. And through that, I would start like just clicking little tiny phrases and pieces from her work, and it would just like inspire. And so through time, I've just done that with a lot of different writers' works, just like popped in and found different pieces and ideas in their work. And then I kind of bring it into my art practice and just into my life, and just meditate on it and think about it and hold it. So both are just, yes, incredibly important to me. And I do like to write, but I do struggle with writing sometimes. I think it's almost too painful to write at some points, and you've been through a lot. It's almost like there's so much realness there. There's so much to go through. Sometimes painting is painting is an escape, and writing is moving towards pain, honestly, in some ways. Or at least with art, you can kind of like go into it really fast and then come out really fast, and then have this like beauty to return to. Where sometimes with actually writing, it does feel like a little scary, because there's nowhere to hide in there, really, for me. So I find writing a little more painful than therapeutic. So I don't often write anymore at this time, but I hope to at some point, because I do really love the process of it more than anything. Mm-hmm.
Your art helps us to imagine a world where everyone gets to be free of their trauma, I guess, in the way that you paint, in a sort of physical way, by becoming bigger than the trauma. How can all of us, professional artists or not, tap into our imaginative or artistic side to ignite a recovery process, or to move through or past certain things that we've experienced?
I love that question so much. The kind of art I'm making now would have been so looked down on. Like, you weren't supposed to paint figuratively. You weren't supposed to paint, for lack of a better way, like a girl. Like, you had to be very masculine in your approach. Like, it just was, my professors all would have hated my work. And I think what my work really is built around, I actually had a job where I was illustrating for children for a little while, and it kind of broke something inside of me. I was like, I can just paint like this for adults. Like, I can use the style I'm using for kids for adults. And so I was really colorful and kind of poppy and plain and like flat. And the more I went towards this world of like play and childhood, and I have a lot of pain in my childhood, so it was like not thinking about, which is often the painful experience of childhood, but the play within childhood. The play was so joyous. And I think the more you can tap into that world, like, I just remember being a little kid and just having like a doll and you can make an entire universe for this doll. And I think when I go to bed sometimes at night, I just think, okay, what do I want to think about today? What stories do I want to tell myself to put myself to sleep? And I think even if you're not an artist or a writer, and even if you are an artist and a writer, giving yourself permission to enter a fantasy world and tell yourself stories like that are just, it's so beautiful and so fun. And I don't think really too few people ever do that and allow themselves that kind of play. And especially as you're going to sleep, just like I do some of my best thinking for my paintings right before I go to sleep. I just imagine these giants through the world and they feel very real to me. And even when I'm like walking down the street, I'll like invite them into my life. Like, hey, they're here with me. And I just kind of can disassociate from this world and go into this other space. And it's just so fun, if nothing else. I hope more people would do that. I think it's a better way to live. It really is.
What would you say to someone who is in an abusive relationship but hasn't yet been able to leave? And I also want to acknowledge in asking that question that there can be all kinds of reasons why someone's not able to leave. There can be the external reasons, like some of the things that you described in your experience, and then there can be that inner dialogue as well that's reaffirming reasons not to leave. But what would you say to that person who is having a similar experience to what you went through?
Unfortunately, it's so common that I've been in the position to watch people I know in similar situations. And I think it's hard because if you have experienced extreme violence, it can be extremely triggering to try to help other people get through it. So I think the most important thing is to, before you're even in that situation, like wherever you live, it's just to get really familiar with the resources available. They're not great. There's not a lot. I think every single person should read, Invisible Bruises or No Visible Bruises, the book that came out a few years ago. It's one of the best deep dives into the state of help for people post domestic violence, what escape, and I use that word intentionally, can look like for various people. And so I think it's everyone's responsibility to like understand what the world looks like and what the options are and be ready with that information. I think the information is the most powerful and scary thing because it's so hard to come by. Like I had to walk by a sign to understand that was a resource for me, and I had to, just all these little things by chance I wish were more just permeated in our society, that everyone knew what to do in these situations. So I think it's important everyone kind of builds up their little arsenal of information before they're in a situation where they see someone in pain, because they probably do know someone in pain. Everyone probably does. And I think I do wish that people were direct with me and just were able to be uncomfortable and like just to have really terrible, awful conversations with people. I think it's just wonderful. Like, and even if they don't seem extremely excited to have that conversation, it takes a little while to build trust. The problem is, for me, when it is extremely painful to watch people not be able to leave, to make the choice to stay. And it's just a very real phenomenon that we need to like understand more. Because I completely understand why. I think it needs to be addressed at such a systemic, broad, national, international level that it needs to get out of our like, it just needs to be so much more. So that's why like places like Toni's house are so important. And I don't know. So I don't have an easy answer for that one. I think I just like to listen it means so much just to listen. If someone is already coming to you with something, that's huge. Like it takes so much for someone to come to you and say something. If that is happening, it's profound and it's probably way worse than you can ever imagine. And you just need to like hear them, listen to them, and do whatever you can. There's these little sheets that I think are fascinating. There's like this questionnaire, five, you must be familiar with this, like 5 questions, like some questions you can ask people in a domestic violence situation. Like, are you experiencing this? Are you experiencing this? Are you experiencing this? And it's fascinating to watch someone go through that list and be like, oh, I am in danger. Because sometimes even though you know you want to get out and you know it's bad, you can't even process the level of danger. And it'll show you on your chart like how much danger you're in. And I think that kind of questionnaire is really important. And even like whenever you go to the doctor, there's, you know, a moment where they say now, like nationally, are you being abused at home? Are you safe in your home? And every time they ask me, I like tear up and I say, thank you for asking that question. It's such an important question. And maybe that's something we can even ask as friends, like, are you safe in your home?
Your paintings tell stories inspired by your past, but what do you look most forward to now?
So much of my life my past is with me every single day in this terrible way, honestly. I think I would love to live more in the present, and it's becoming more and more possible. And I am 36. I would like to have a family. So that's I'm planning that. And it's a beautiful thing to imagine being able at an older age, having gone through a lot, to have a family now. And it's so funny that I was thinking about having a family at 22 and to be 36 and now thinking about having a family is so different. And I'm excited to kind of think about what that might look like and how I can kind of break patterns and do it a little better and to be just to make a safe space for someone else. That's it.
Thanks for watching In Recovery with Toni's House. Toni's House provides a safe living environment and a supportive community for people in transition, helping them heal, reconnect with children and family, and develop the skills needed for a healthy and fulfilled life. You can support Toni's House by visiting tonyshouse.org/donate and by clicking the subscribe button for more informative content and inspiring stories.